Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. Hope you had a great weekend, and we're going to have a lot to talk about today. As a matter of fact, the United States is deploying an aircraft carrier strike group, and that is because of some concerns of what is happening in Israel and even the possibility that Iran or Iranian proxies might be planning an attack on U.S. forces in the region. So we'll get into that a little bit later. Also give you an update on some of the slogans being used right now in the presidential campaign on the Democratic side that I just wanted to kind of evaluate. And one of the articles we've posted by our friend Andrew McCarthy, The Big Lie That Attorney General Barr Lied. And so we'll get to that just a little bit later this hour. But if you've listened to this program any length of time, you know the concerns that we've had about, for example, the philosophy that says it's really no problem to let a biological male who thinks she is a female go to the girls' shower room, and the whole question about dress code and a variety of other issues. And it's all the more reason why I hope that some of you might really consider running for the school board, because there's a fair amount of insanity that takes place there, and there's a need for Christian teachers, Christian parents, school board members to speak out. Of course, when they do, they're lambasted, and that's one of the reasons why we're going to focus on some of this. Our good friend Dr. Christian Overman has been on the program many times before and told us the story about Dr. Darrell Furgason. If you get his Worldview Matters updates, you're well aware of some of the story that we're going to be talking about, and that has to do with a man by the name of Dr. Darrell Furgason. He has been involved in Christian education for more than 30 years. He's been teaching in Australia, United States, and Canada. Was the Dean of College of Humanities and International Studies at the University of Nations. He has also taught political science at Trinity Western University. Also is an adjunct professor in the government department there at Liberty University, and an individual that has a bachelor's degree from Australian National University, a master's degree in international relations, and a PhD in religious studies from the University of Sydney, and joins us now by phone. So, Dr. Furgason, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, again, we've heard about you through Christian Overman, and I have lots of material about this, but I guess the first way to kind of get into this is to talk about the fact that, as we've encouraged people to do, to actually run for the school board, as a member of the school board, you actually raised, I thought, some legitimate questions about the dress code, or in this particular case, the decision to no longer have a dress code. But give us the background story, if you might.
Well, I decided to run for school board, just to give a little background there, because there was a lot of parental involvement here, concern over SOGI 123, SOGI being sexual orientation, gender identity, which
Right.
is massively influencing every Western country, even the United States, where males can claim to be transitioning to female. So I ran for the school board with 5 other Christians in our town here. There are 60 school districts in British Columbia. I don't know how many in each of your states, but I ran because I thought, you know what, we need to encourage Christians. Well, we needed to get 4 out of 7 elected. We got 3 elected out of 7 and missed the 4th position by 33 votes.
Wow.
So now we are effectively a minority part, although we're not party, it's one board, but effectively we are in opposition. So we have been speaking out against policies that the people who call themselves progressives, which is extreme left wing, if you want to put it that way, who are elected, have been launching policy changes. And one of them is, put forward by a person on the chair who I can't name, but a person in the board, to abolish dress codes and that girls or boys should be able to wear whatever they want. And I raised the issue of modesty and decency that, people today may come braless, topless, underwear showing, boys can be shirtless. There has to be the right of the school and teachers to maintain a professional environment and to have the final say, but that's been taken away.
Yes.
If you allow students to do whatever they want. And I raised the issue, we need to, make sure that there's modesty. Well, that word modesty just erupted in the media.
Oh boy.
I was accused, believe it or not, by the media, and it went right into Vancouver media, the province and the Vancouver Sun, because the media talk to each other. And
by the way, I've read some of those, so I'm well aware of what you're going to say. Go ahead.
I was a pervert. I was disgusting. I was a dinosaur. And the head of a union here, the International Longshore Warehouse Union, who run the docks, plus the BC Teachers Federation Union that all teachers are in, the one union head, he of the International Longshoremen Union, he said, I'm promoting a rape culture.
Yeah.
I'm promoting a rape culture simply by asking for modesty means, and I was said, you're a pervert who can't stand to see semi-clad girls without, reacting, and you want to cover them up. So that's some of the background. That's some of the issues that you face in the public arena. But, we've got to be in there if you want to have a voice and you want to shift the philosophical focus to a more biblical principles.
Well, and again, I know the president of the British Columbia Teachers Federation didn't say that this was puritanical, but said it was Dark Ages thinking. So that even predates the Puritans. And, having taken some courses at Regent College, which is right there by UBC, and having spoken in Fraser Valley and all of that, when I am in British Columbia, it reminds me of where I was born, Berkeley, California. And I remember as an older guy around here that in the 1960s, there was a lot of experimentation in the public schools where I went. And so, again, it was sort of this idea that we'll let the kids wear anything they want. Well, back then, it was in the 1960s where a lot of the girls were wearing mini skirts, and I mean kind of micro mini. And my line that I've used more than once is that it got so bad in my middle school Spanish class that I couldn't even concentrate on conjugating Spanish verbs. And then I always have people raise the question, ask, well, what was your degree? What was your grade in that? And so we've been down this road before. We know what happens when there are no rules and we have open classrooms and we have any person can dress any way he or she wants. And we can also allow anybody to, of course, define themselves as male, female, none of the above. Mm-hmm. And so I want to take a break and come back and talk about how this is played out there in Canada. Because if nothing else, Dr. Furgason, I think you give us a little bit of a view for what will happen in the rest of the country if we aren't involved as Christians. So let's take a break, but also we're going to keep Dr. Furgason with us a little bit longer because I want him to tell the rest of the story and how we should be involved. But maybe you've been dealing with this issue of dress code or SOGI strategy or the transgender issue in your school. So we'd love to get your reports as well as we hear from him. And if you'd like to know a little bit more about him, we, of course, have some material that, as always, is available on our website, pointofview.net, including a link to a Worldview Studies Center, so you can find out more about that. So we're going to provide a lot of great information for you, but also love to hear from you about some of the kind of battles we're facing in the public schools when there are no dress codes, there are no rules. Everybody does what they think is right in their own eyes. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
President Trump's opponents argue that there is no crisis at the border, thus we don't need to build a wall or deploy troops to the border. Proponents, of course, argue just the opposite. Is there any way to evaluate these contradictory claims? One way, of course, is to look at the increasing number of men, women, and children crossing our southern border. The U.S. Border Patrol reported that more than 76,000 migrants crossed illegally in the country in just 1 month. That seems like a crisis. But there's another way to evaluate those claims. That is to look at the number of those migrants who came across our border with dangerous intentions. Terrence Jeffrey, editor-in-chief of CNS News, and he examined the criminal statistics for federal courts. He found that the 5 federal court districts that sit along the U.S.-Mexico border were the top 5 districts in the country for the number of defendants convicted and sentenced to imprisonment last year. Those would be the Western and Southern Districts of Texas, the Southern District of California, and the districts of Arizona and New Mexico. He has mentioned in some of his radio interviews that this is well known by assistant U.S. attorneys. They know that if you want to work in a busy federal court district, just go to West Texas, South Texas, Arizona, California, or New Mexico. Even more to the point, criminals like drug cartels, migrant smugglers, and human traffickers know that the border is not secure. Lest you think this is a recent anomaly, just look at previous years. He says that every single year, going back to 1959, the Office of U.S. Attorneys has published an annual statistical report that shows a similar pattern. People on both sides of the border are being victimized, and the court records provide yet another statistical illustration of why we need to protect the nation's border. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continuing our conversation today with Dr. Darrell Furgason, I might just mention again, we're looking at this idea of SOGI Strategy. SOGI stands for Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity, something we've talked about here in the United States. But again, his experience there in Canada, I think, is just a preview of coming attractions if we don't get involved in our local communities. We do have a link to Worldview Studies Center. It's worldviewstudies.ca. CA stands for Canada, but you don't have to remember all that. We have a link right there by his bio and just some information about that. But Dr. Furgason, let's see if we can talk about if indeed you might have actually had 4 Christians on that. And I think there is really some wisdom, as Christian Overman was talking about, in running as a pack rather than lone wolves. But if you had, even so, I would imagine that there would have been a fair amount of outcry if all 4 of you Christians called for some kind of continuation of the dress code. But as it is now, it seems to me that a teacher, a principal, an administrator, even a parent can't say anything, as far as I understand, about anything any young person might wear. Is that a fair assessment of what you have now actually developed there in Chilliwack?
Well, you know, the board motion was that it places the decision between the parent and the student. And we all know that, even my wife admitted that, you know, quite often students might leave the home dressed appropriately, but change into something else when they get to school.
Right.
And so really,
We've seen that,
and,
by the way, in the private schools, too. You know, I was just talking to somebody
Yeah.
because a lot of the private schools have dress codes. Matter of fact, a lot of the various other kinds of schools do, charter schools and some of those, but they'll leave those with the maybe the skirt down and then roll the skirt up as they go.
Yeah.
So even in the private schools, this is happening. And so just to say that, well, the parents have signed off on this is ridiculous, especially since the parents oftentimes are off at work while the kids are going to school and they haven't seen them anyway.
Yeah, so there is that issue, and a lot of families are dysfunctional, so the parent isn't involved, or you have all sorts of combinations defined in Canada as family.
Right.
So, and then even parent can't be used, you know. So, you know, you have issues. But the main point I was trying to make was, look, the current policy taken from another district was that, you know, we don't want to see bra straps and we don't want to see underwear. And they even mentioned the word cleavage, okay? I thought that was well understood, you know, that we don't want girls there or boys, you know, although the girls have the cleavage more. But, you know, it's obvious biologically. So I said, you know, well, it's a teacher's right as a professional as well to have a professional working environment. And there are laws against sexual harassment. You know, you can't walk naked into your radio station without somebody saying, you know what, you need to dress up. So there's there are dress codes in all areas of work in our life, you know, and students are being trained for life to be able to be successful. So, you know, I mentioned that, we don't want it's a teacher should have a right not to be sitting in front of semi-clad people or girls with cleavage exposed. It's a form, I said. Didn't know that there would be an avalanche come upon me, but it's a form of sexual harassment in the workplace. Right. Well,
and then that's the point. Isn't school supposed to get you ready for the workaday environment? And again, the argument I guess I'd make if I were on that school board is to say, look, if one of these individuals, dressed however we're now talking about, showed up at a job interview, that would guarantee that they wouldn't get hired. And so are we not encouraging behavior that will actually cripple their ability to get a job in the marketplace? If we're educating them about what they should do with their minds, shouldn't we also educate them about how to conduct themselves? Otherwise, we're going to have permanently unemployable individuals because they'll say, well, this is the way I dressed when I was in school. What is your problem? And the employer looks at it and says, well, there's all sorts of problems, and you're not going to come into this particular work environment with that kind of dress and that kind of attitude.
Well, you know, you're being so logical. You know, you're using reason.
Oh,
but I'm telling you, we are not living in the age of rationality and reason, okay? And there seems to be a massive push from progressives, I'll use that term, I think we know what it means, to deconstruct rules, to deconstruct morality, to make rights, to claim rights that don't exist, but now do because you claim them. A right for a male who's born a male who now says he feels like a female, and he doesn't use the word female. They use the word woman, and I'm going to focus on that in a minute because that's philosophically crucial that we continue to use the words male, female rather than man, woman. So a person born a male and who now says he's transgender and calls himself a woman can now go into a girl's change room. And this is happening in our schools now here. I know what's happening in the U.S. And we have parents saying, hey, I've got a grade 11 girl, and she comes up and says to me, yeah, there are boys in the girls' change room, and I don't have a right to privacy anymore. So females are losing the right to privacy as we give supposed rights to transgenders to choose whatever washroom or dressing room they feel is appropriate. So girls are losing their rights to privacy and decency because we're in an age where truth is not objective anymore. It's not rational. It's not something that's logical. You're preparing them for the future work in society, which is true. Oh, no. This is completely autonomy, free from any moral constraints, and we can define ourselves as we want now. You know, they even use the term the sex you were assigned at birth, as though it was some kind of lottery that happened, and it wasn't true because you were a girl, but you got a boy's genitalia, and you're going to go back to your true self. So this is a philosophical thing called postmodernism, right? The deconstruct that truth is what you want it to be to yourself. Truth is what you identify in your community as. There's no objective truth. There's no rationality now. And that is all, it's based on emotive. It's based on feelings. And then we're getting laws like hate speech. If you say, there was a man in BC who called his I think it was his son who wanted to become a girl. He called his son by he instead of she. He got fined. He can go to jail if you misgender somebody. And this is all going to come into the schools where teachers have to ask the students what pronoun they prefer to be called. I mean, it's madness. It's the deconstruction of reality. It's the postmodern dream.
And again, we're saying this from a Christian point of view, but even Jordan Peterson, for example, out of there in Canada, is saying the same kinds of things. So we only got a couple of minutes left, but first of all, I wanted to direct people to worldviewstudies.ca because, again, that's a wonderful Worldview Studies Center that you have. But also I wanted you, just before we ran out of time, to encourage our listeners to get involved. They might hear this and say, well, I guess that's a good reason why I shouldn't run for the school board. No, I think if nothing else, the fact that even though you didn't get all 4 of your Christians on and you got 3, there's always another election. This is all the more reason why we need to get people involved in the school board. So what would you say to some of our listeners who are saying, well, I've never really thought about running for the school board? Is there a value in doing so?
Yes, absolutely crucial that Christians get involved, and this is an easy way to start. You don't need any qualification to run for school board except a concern for those issues that happen in schools, and it's public schools, and so we should be concerned about children and what happens to them, especially if they're being taught things at a young age like transgenderism. So yes, Christians can get elected. We did run as a group of 5 because we recognize we canvassed within our church. We got 2 members, myself and another woman, elected from our church, and we went around and said who'd like to run, and so other districts in Vancouver, Burnaby, and the whole Fraser Valley did the same. Sadly, nobody kept a record of who actually was nominated and then made sure there were people on the ballot. So would you believe it, in Chilliwack, we ran more people in our little town of 90,000 than Vancouver did, and they didn't get anybody elected. So most of these school boards are all progressive. So people need to run. They can get elected. They should run as a group. Therefore, you can coordinate. We missed a few key things strategically that would have got us 33 more votes. So, yes, this is not the era to sit back and trust the school system. We must, as Christians, become salt and light. We must bring God's principles into the public arena for the sake of the innocent.
Well, again,
otherwise.
Yeah. Dr. Darrell Furgason, I just want to say thank you for, first of all, running. Thank you for being willing to be lambasted, I guess was the word that Christian Overman used. And thank you for encouraging us to do so. I'd like to get a kind of an update from you from time to time, but I thought this was very appropriate because in the state of Texas, and we broadcast in 42 different states, but in the state of Texas, we just had an election on Saturday, May 4th. And I saw a number of individuals that I agree with elected to school board. So I do see that happening even here. So thank you for the encouragement, and we'll check in with you from time to time. So thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
We're going to take a break and get into some more issues in the news, and then we will be doing some other interviews in the next hour. Look at what has happened in the Middle East, look what's happened in the campaign right after this.
Here's some great news. If you missed the deadline to sign up for health insurance, or more importantly, if you sign up for a plan that you're just not happy with, you still have a choice. It's called Medi-Share, and Medi-Share is a Christian healthcare sharing program. It's been around for 25 years. They have more than 400,000 members now around the country. And get this, over the years, Medi-Share members have shared more than $2 billion of each other's medical bills, so they could help share your needs too. And best of all, you could save a lot of money with Medi-Share. The typical savings for a family is around $500 a month. Your savings could be more or less, but think about what you could do with that extra money every month. So if you think you're stuck with a high-cost health plan that doesn't have much to offer, think again. You can join Medi-Share anytime, so call them today and check it out. There's no pressure. They're super easy to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me kind of give you an overview for what's going to be happening this week. First of all, let me just mention that the Millennial Roundtable will now be Tuesday because that works better with Nick Pitts' schedule. But nevertheless, let me also mention some of the people I'm going to be interviewing this week. Taya Kyle, who is the widow of Chris Kyle of American Sniper, will be with us on Wednesday in studio, as a matter of fact. We'll be talking about her new book. And then Sean McDowell will be with us by phone, and we'll be talking about apologetics and his new book as well. Later in the week, we have Jay Warner Wallace also talking about apologetics, as well as Skip Heisek, who is a pastor at Calvary in Albuquerque, just to mention a few of the individuals. And even this hour, we will just maybe get into some of the news, but next hour we'll be talking with Ben Courson about his book, Optimisfits, as well as Ken Harrison, Rise of the Servant King. So we just got lots of things to cover, and I hope you'll be with us all through the program. And if we can, let's just turn our eyes towards Israel and the Middle East for just a moment. And that is, first of all, we've had these about 700 rockets fired from Hamas in the Gaza to south part, or the southern part of Israel. That's caused some people to say, well, you guys are going to be going to Israel in October. And first of all, I point out that there is already a ceasefire. Some have criticized Benjamin Netanyahu for agreeing to that as a capitulation. But the reality is always about this time every year, as you get close to the anniversary of the creation of the nation of Israel, created back in May 14th in 1948. You also, of course, have some of this activity. Plus, there seems to be some indication that Iran is kind of rattling the cages here, and that's why the United States has deployed an aircraft carrier strike group and a bomber task force to the Middle East. Relatively on short notice, Israel alerted the United States to the possibility that Iran or Iranian proxies were planning to attack U.S. forces in the region. So we'll find out where that is. And this surprise announcement came last night that the USS Abraham Lincoln and a bomber task force were being deployed in response to troubling and escalatory indications and warnings. There was a statement from the National Security Advisor, John Bolton, who's been on the program with us before, said the deployments were intended to send a clear and unmistakable message to the Iranian regime that any attack on the United States' interest or on those of our allies will be met with unrelenting force. I went on to say in the statement, the United States is not seeking war with the Iranian regime, but we are fully prepared to respond to any attack, whether by proxy. I'll go into some more of that a little bit later. If some of you like to join the conversation, feel free to do so, 1-800-351-1212. But for the next couple of minutes, maybe for the rest of this half hour, I might mention, we might put all of this under the heading of you're entitled to your own opinions, but you're not entitled to your own facts. That was a phrase that was used, interestingly enough, years ago by then Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan. It's one we use around this table so often because you are entitled to your opinion, and the program is called Point of View, and I'd love to hear your point of view, but you're not entitled to your own facts. And that certainly is something that Andrew McCarthy quotes in one of the first articles we've posted here, The Big Lie That Barr Lied. And the reason we want to focus on some of that is the fact that there are individuals claiming that the Attorney General lied in his testimony in front of the House. As I think we'll see in just a minute, that is not the case. But it also, as a phrase, you're entitled to your own opinion, but not your own facts, to some things I'll get to a little bit later this half hour if we have time. Some of the claims being made by Senator Bernie Sanders that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. Part of that is not true. Also, some of the claims being made by Beto O'Rourke, former representative, in his rolling out his Green New Deal legislation, and even some of the things said by Senator Kamala Harris this weekend at the NAACP conference. So we'll get into all of that along the way, but let's take the first one first. And that is Andrew McCarthy, who, again, has a legal background, was actually best known for the individual that brought prosecutions against the first attack on the World Trade Center and writes for National Review. said, I originally thought this was too stupid to write about, but stupid is like the plague inside the Beltway. One catches it, next thing you know, there's an outbreak at MSNBC, and the Speaker of the House is showing symptoms as well. And it's the whole question of whether or not the Attorney General, Bill Barr, has engaged in perjury. And he uses the phrase, we're all entitled to our own opinions, but are we entitled to our own facts? And he then takes on the fact that, first of all, there were people that had questions about the Attorney General, saying that there was a spying on the Trump campaign, something I dealt with in a commentary recently. But if nothing else, the claim is that the Attorney General, William Barr, gave false testimony. And he says, first of all, it's frivolous for all sorts of reasons. But let's get into what is actually claimed and how it has been spun to say that he engaged in perjury. And that is, you go back to earlier last month, April 9th, in testimony before the House Appropriations Committee. This was supposed to be just a presentation on the budget for the Justice Department. And as you might imagine, it devolved very quickly into what was in the Mueller report and how was it reported by the Attorney General, William Barr, in his 4-page summary of that. And so the argument is that in receiving questioning from Representative Charlie Crist, that this constituted some kind of perjury. Now, the Attorney General on April 9th testified that he had no idea why the special counsel, that would be Robert Mueller, was upset over the way Barr's March 24th letter described his report. Again, that's a 4-page summary of over 400 pages in the Mueller report, when in fact William Barr didn't know because he had received a March 27th letter from the special counsel, if you will, Robert Mueller. Well, if you go back and look at the exchange, and this is what I appreciate so much about Andrew McCarthy, the question from Mr. Crisp and Representative Crist was, reports have emerged recently, General, that the members of the special counsel's team are frustrated at some level with the limited information included in your March 24th letter. Goes on to ask some other questions. So the Attorney General, William Barr, says, no, I don't think. I suspect that they probably wanted more put out. So remember, he's talking about they, the special counsel's team. But in my view, I was not interested in putting out summaries or trying to summarize, because I think any summary, regardless of who prepares it, not only runs the risk of being under-inclusive or over-inclusive, but also would trigger a lot of discussion and analysis that really should have waited until it came out. So the argument is that when he said, I have no idea why Robert Mueller was upset, the question wasn't whether Robert Mueller was upset, but the members of the special counsel's team was upset. And so if you go back and recognize that this is, if you look at the actual words, responding to the question about why the Robert Mueller team was upset, well, he doesn't know why they were. He knows maybe why Robert Mueller might have been upset because he received the letter, but that wasn't the question. And I love what Andrew McCarthy's saying here. He says, I don't mean to be hyper-technical, whereas, remember at that time President Clinton said, it depends on what the definition of is. But if somebody asks you, can you explain why the team is upset? And he says, no, I don't know why the team is upset. That's a different question than can you explain why Robert Mueller is upset? And we're not parsing verbs. It's very obvious he was responding in the context to why the staff was upset and left it at that. So again, he says to avoid the misimpression that he was parsing words deceptively, then Attorney General William Barr even went on and volunteered his perception that maybe the staff wanted more information about the report to be publicized. And so I think you can see that this is the case. So anyway, the summary here, which you can read in its entirety by Andrew McCarthy, says Mueller received fawning press for 2 years on the expectation that he would slay Trump. Then on March 24th, Democrats and the media learned not only that there was no collusion, but that Mueller had been derelict, failing to even render a judgment on whether or not should be a charge of obstruction. Journalists proceeded to then turn on Mueller, who wanted to then charge Trump with obstruction based on the creative theory that, hey, he had been pursuing, namely that the president should be indicted for obstruction based on the exercise of constitutional prerogatives. And when that was the case, then, of course, the press and now some of the Democrats in the House have turned on the Attorney General, William Barr. Anyway, you can read it in its entirety, but I think it's probably a very quick but very clear understanding that there was no perjury. There will be no charges brought on perjury, but you're going to hear about this for days in the mainstream media. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention next hour we're going to have Ben Courson with us for a while, and then Ken Harrison. So some great interviews. But while we're looking at the campaign here, I think it is really important to recognize that some of these campaign issues are going to surface time and time again. And so one of the things I really want to encourage you to do is to evaluate some of these kinds of claims that are being made, because these are certainly very important to evaluate. But while I got a minute, let me also welcome to the microphone a new radio station, WFAL, which is 105.9 Milner, Georgia. That's an area between Macon and Peachtree City in Georgia, and serving Lamar, Spalding, Pike, and Upson counties. That, I think, brings the Good News Network up to 22 different broadcast outlets. And I'll again welcome them again at the top of the hour. But just while we had a minute there, wanted to mention that we are excited to have a new station that is listening to Point of View. And by the way, if you're listening for the first time, one of the things I think is really important, especially during a campaign, is to evaluate some of the slogans and statements being made. Back to the argument I just made a minute ago, it's the old Daniel Patrick Moynihan line: everyone is entitled to their own opinions, but they're not entitled to their own facts. And one of these slogans that just keeps getting repeated time and time again, primarily by Senator Bernie Sanders, but not exclusively, is the slogan that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And since he and other candidates keep using that slogan, it's really maybe time to evaluate it and to critique it. First of all, while it is true that the rich are getting richer, it is not true that the poor are getting poorer. And if you just want to look at America for a minute, we'll stay on that. You can see, first of all, that the rich are getting richer. John Stossel, by the way, has a whole video that just came out recently in which points out that, the wealth of the richest people in America has doubled over the last 4 decades. But it's also true that poor Americans have seen themselves get richer by 32% during that same period of time. By the way, these are adjusted for inflation. So if nothing else, you see that. And I will admit that if you look at some other sources, you'll see slightly different statistics, but they're all about the same order of magnitude. So I think we're pretty close to accurate. And so a good question to be asking is, why worry when some people get richer, since poor people are also doing better as well? And sure, the percentages are different, but if nothing else, I think we should applaud that a rising tide floats all boats. Now, if you look worldwide, there again is evidence that the richest people in the world have gotten quite rich. But also, you've noticed that those individuals under what's considered extreme poverty, we've been able, as we've documented in previous commentaries, actually been able to worldwide raise 1 billion people out of extreme poverty. So much so that even the singer Bono had to admit that recently in one of these world conferences, that he said, I'm no fan of free market, but I just got to admit the obvious, and that is probably the mechanism that has raised so many people out of extreme poverty has been a free market. So the first issue, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, is not true. If you say the rich have gotten richer, yes. And some people say, well, it's terrible that they're getting richer. Well, I'm back to the 10th commandment, the idea of covetousness. If the rich get richer, so good for them. The fact that poor are getting richer too is, I think, the really relevant point that doesn't get mentioned in some of these slogans. But a corollary to that is one I thought I'd also get into real quickly, and we'll move on to the next one. And that is that we have a lack of income mobility. And this is something that has been said for some time, that we're just sort of locked in and there's no way that you can rise above your status. And again, let's be honest and recognize that children born to rich parents oftentimes have a greater advantage than children born into poverty, but they're not necessarily locked into that economic class. If you look at economists at Harvard University, studies done at the University of California at Berkeley and other places, we found that the richest fifth actually fall out of that bracket within 20 years, and those born to the poorest fifth climb to a higher quintile, and so sometimes even to the top quintile. Pretty interesting. So again, if you want to look at it another way, look at the Forbes richest list. Look at the stories of these billionaires. You'll find most of them did not inherit their money. They were able to, in one way or another, build a business. So those are some statements made about rich and poor. But some of the others that are surfacing are just more and more candidates are talking about voter suppression. That surfaced the other day when Senator Kamala Harris proclaimed that without voter suppression, Stacey Abrams would have been the governor of Georgia, Andrew Gillum would have been the governor of Florida. Just for the record, by the way, Abrams lost by 54,000 votes. Gillum lost by 32,000 votes. But nevertheless, so let's, if we can, deal with that. First of all, when we have seen in certain states, they've reduced the number of days for early voting. For example, listeners in North Carolina right now know that they've reduced the days for early voting in North Carolina from 17 to 10. Or Florida has reduced their early voting days from 14 to 8. That's not voter suppression. If it was, we have, what is it, about 10 different states that don't even have early voting. Nobody calls that voter suppression. So, again, if you are a citizen, you're registered to vote, you can still vote on early voting, or you can vote on the day of the election, and that's not voter suppression. The more often comment about voter suppression is, well, we remove some voters from the rolls. And since I have a lot of listeners in the state of Georgia, let's look at Georgia for a minute. The Georgia law required voters to be removed from the rolls if they had not cast a ballot in 3 different elections and did not respond to any inquiry by mail. So even though there were a number of voters that were reduced and removed from the rolls, African-American voter registration actually increased, and in this last election, African-American turnout also increased as well. Might mention for our listeners in Iowa and Missouri, where they've even had voter ID, again, minority turnout increased as well. So as I've documented in many previous commentaries, and I'll even document in a commentary coming out next week, whenever we've had any attempt to actually work at voter integrity, it actually has, in every single case that I've ever been able to document, resulted in increased participation, both in registration and in voting of minority candidates and minority citizens. So that is another one of those phrases you just keep hearing time and time again. It just was worth mentioning that once again, you're going to hear these slogans, and even though you hear these slogans, they aren't necessarily true. Everybody's entitled to their own opinions, but they're not entitled to their own facts, and we're going to continue here on Point of View taking on some of those things that just get mentioned time and time again. And because they get mentioned so often, after a while, people tend to believe that they're true, and they simply are not. Let's take a break, though. When we come back, we're going to talk with Ben Courson about his Optimisfits, and then a little bit later, we'll talk with Ken Harrison about The Rise of Servant Kings, which is just a great book about being a man of God. I think you'll really appreciate that. But if you find yourself saying, I'd like to know a little bit more about some of the things you're talking about today, we have posted those articles, as we always have here on Point of View. And if you appreciate the fact that we like to do some of these fact checks and give you some facts that maybe you don't hear anywhere else, I hope you might click on that button that says donate. We certainly need your financial support, and if you can help us out, we would greatly appreciate that. And again, once again, welcome those of you listening today on this new station, WFAL. Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover, and we will do so, that and really cover some more important issues right after these important messages.
It's amazing but true. When it comes to one of America's biggest household expenditures, healthcare, a lot of people think they've got no choice. People are used to thinking we have to do it this way, but they don't. Yes, you have the freedom to choose an alternative with your healthcare. It's MediShare, and it costs way less than the alternatives. The typical family saves $500 a month, not a year, a month. And if you're single, this can save you a lot too. And let's face it, a big reason MediShare is 400,000 people strong, it just works. They've shared over $3 billion in medical bills, so they can help share your needs too. Joining MediShare for so many people is one of those things that makes you say, why didn't I do this before? So yes, the time has come for something better. Look into joining MediShare and see why so many people are opting out of the old way and into the new. Why not look into this? Just call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour again, let me welcome to the broadcast family, WFAL 105.9 Milner, Georgia. First day that many of you in that particular area between Macon and Peachtree City in Georgia are having a chance to hear the program. The program's called Point of View. And again, this I think makes the 22nd broadcast outlet for the Good News Network, and just another radio station having a chance to hear the conversation we're going to have this hour. First of all, the first half hour, we'll be talking with Ben Courson, and then we'll be talking with Ken Harrison. So some great material. And I might just mention for those of you that are new listeners that we actually do a Millennial Roundtable. That will be taking place tomorrow. Those of you that have been listening for some time, it actually in the past has been on Wednesday, but Dr. Nick Pitts, it makes it easier for him to host the program on Tuesdays. So that will take place tomorrow. And this would have been a good program for the Millennial Roundtable, but I think it's a good one for all of us. We recognize that when we talk about Generation Y, the millennials, or Generation Z, sometimes called the centennials, or even sometimes the iGen generation, they are the most depressed generation in history. And so this is why I thought it would be so appropriate to spend some time talking with Ben Courson about his book, Optimisfits, Igniting a Fierce Rebellion Against Hopelessness. He is the founder, if you're not familiar, of Hope Generation, has a global TV and radio program, a very gifted speaker indeed, and an individual that has quite willingly said, you know what, I'm a misfit, but I'm also an optimistic misfit. So, Ben, welcome to Point of View.
Thank you so much for having me. For a second, I just thought I was listening to the radio. I forgot that I was actually live. So this is going to be fun.
Yes, well, you're listening to the radio, and we also are doing it live. And people can ask you some questions in just a minute if they like. Let me just mention your book's been out for a while, and we just tried to get you on earlier and didn't work out, but it came out through Harvest House back in March, and just a wonderful book, which I'll hold up here for people watching it online. And first of all, you have made me rethink about the word misfit. Misfit has always had a negative connotation, but you say, I'm proud to be a misfit. Explain.
Yeah, I mean, if you look up the word misfit in Webster's dictionary, you're going to see someone who is poorly adapted to an environment or situation. And yet, I think that's actually a pretty good definition. Most of the world's historical leaders changed this mode of dust hurtling through a sunbeam at 67,000 miles per hour by being maladjusted. In fact, I read this book a few years ago called The First-Rate Madness, where it argued that MLK had chronic dysthymia, and Abraham Lincoln and Winston Churchill were both suicidal. I mean, Churchill didn't want to live on a second-story flat because he said, if I'm on the upper story, desperate thoughts do come into the head, and I don't want to fling myself off the balcony on a whim. Or Abraham Lincoln struggled with suicidal depression when he would walk in the woods alone with a shotgun with his neurosis. Or Martin Luther King Jr. actually attempted suicide twice. And so my heart is that instead of getting depressed that we don't fit in, instead of being suicidal because we're maladjusted, let's remember that we can take situations that are painful and convert them into pain fuel. And that drives us onto our destiny. We can actually take our misfit nature to change the planet, because the world is always changed by those who are crazy enough to think they can actually do it, as Steve Jobs said.
Yes, in chapter 14, you talk about some of your heroes, and then later on you talk about some other heroes. I learned a fair amount about science as well. I didn't know you were going to delve into that as well. Fascinating. But again, this idea of optimism, help us out, because we so often address this idea of depression, loneliness, deaths of despair. Sometimes when I'm on with Dr. Nick Pitts, who is the host oftentimes of our Millennial Roundtable, sometimes he brings me in as a non-millennial, token non-millennial, but nevertheless, that's a very significant issue, and in some respects, one of the major reasons why you wrote this book.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, depression is the problem today. There's a popular phrase among hipsters right now that, like, you know, it's very enlightened and you're woke if you can say, I am learning to live with depression. And I like to say that's an awful phrase. I don't want to live with depression. I want to defeat depression, because depression is running rampant right now. It has the run of the place and is the order of the day. I mean, suicide is one of the top 10 leading causes of death in America. The suicide rate has increased by 25% nationally, according to USA Today. In fact, there are 123 suicides per day in America. We live in the nation that's built on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and yet we're stressed, depressed, distressed, and in debt over $1 trillion to China. People commit suicide once every 40 seconds around the world.
Right.
This is crazy. I mean, we as Americans actually consume more pills due to anxiety and depression than the rest of the earth combined by 3 times over. I read a couple different studies. One said that antidepressants are number 1. Another study said number 2, best-selling prescribed medication in America. So that's why I'm so passionate about this message of hope, because I believe it is the key and central issue that our generation needs to tackle.
I might just mention, too, that just a tremendous number of accolades in the front of the book from individuals. Of course, we've talked about Levi Lesko. As a matter of fact, I might just mention some of the people that have actually endorsed your book or are going to be on the program with us, like Skip Heisig will be on later in the week. So, again, just very, very well received. 230 pages published by our good friends at Harvest House. If you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to get a copy of the book, you should be able to find it in your local bookstore because it's been out for some time. But we also have a link to your website. Also, we have a link to your Twitter page, your Facebook posts, and all those kinds of things. So that's all available on our website, pointofview.net. But before we take our first break, let's see if we can, maybe I got a couple minutes here, maybe have you tell your story, because some people might say, well, it's just real easy for you to say, Ben. You know, it's not like you've lost a sister or had somebody die of cancer or ever dealt with depression. Wrong, because you've actually dealt with all of that, haven't you?
Yeah, my sister actually went to heaven and died in a car accident when she was 16 years old. 2 months ago, my brother died of colon cancer. I went through 10 years of chronic depression where I was suicidal myself because I felt like a misfit and I didn't fit in. I went through a romantic heartbreak a couple of years ago that left me feeling like a robot with dead batteries, like I would never be happy again, just an emotional flatline. And yet through all of this, God has taught me that what Paul said is true. This is what Paul said in Romans 5. We glory also in tribulation, because tribulation produces perseverance. Perseverance produces experience. Experience produces hope, and hope never maketh ashamed, because of the love of God spread abroad in our hearts by the power of the Holy Ghost, which is given unto us. So if you're listening today to this radio program and you feel like you don't have hope because of what you're suffering, let me remind you that pain either has the power to break you, or it is the power that makes you unbreakable. What it is depends on who you are. Don't react to your suffering, respond to your struggle, and pain will make you stronger. Tears will make you braver. Heartbreak will make you wiser, and one day you'll thank your past for a better future.
Ben Courson with us, and we're going to take a break and then continue with him. But let me just mention we have a link to bencourson.com, and you don't have to even know how to spell his last name because we have the link there. That will give you a chance to get a copy of his book. Of course, you might be able to find it in your local bookstore. Also, you can find some of the episodes from his TV show, some of the various podcast and radio programs, and all sorts of other resources, which we have on our website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break, though. We'll pick out just a couple of other great illustrations in this book. And as I've said before, it's published by Harvest House. Probably already in your bookstore, but if you can't find it, we've also given you some links so you can get it there, too. We'll take a break and come back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
President Trump's opponents argue that there is no crisis at the border, thus we don't need to build a wall or deploy troops to the border. Proponents, of course, argue just the opposite. Is there any way to evaluate these contradictory claims? One way, of course, is to look at the increasing number of men, women, and children crossing our southern border. The U.S. Border Patrol reported that more than 76,000 migrants crossed illegally in the country in just 1 month. That seems like a crisis. But there's another way to evaluate those claims. That is to look at the number of those migrants who came across our border with dangerous intentions. Terrence Jeffrey, editor-in-chief of CNS News, and he examined the criminal statistics for federal courts. He found that the 5 federal court districts that sit along the U.S.-Mexico border were the top 5 districts in the country for the number of defendants convicted and sentenced to imprisonment last year. Those would be the western and southern districts of Texas, the southern district of California, and the districts of Arizona and New Mexico. He has mentioned in some of his radio interviews that this is well known by assistant U.S. attorneys. They know that if you want to work in a busy federal court district, just go to West Texas, South Texas, Arizona, California, or New Mexico. Even more to the point, criminals like drug cartels, migrant smugglers, and human traffickers know that the border is not secure. Lest you think this is a recent anomaly, just look at previous years. He says that every single year, going back to 1959, the Office of U.S. Attorneys has published an annual statistical report that shows a similar pattern. People on both sides of the border are being victimized, and the court records provide yet another statistical illustration of why we need to protect the nation's border. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation with Ben Courson for a few more minutes, and then we're going to move on to another topic, but we wanted you to know about this book, Optimisfits, and again, Igniting a Fierce Rebellion Against Hopelessness. And if nothing else, Ben, I'd like to focus on the fact that a lot of people are depressed or struggling or maybe don't have a good self-esteem because they've had failure in their life. And first of all, failure is part of life, and one of the books I oftentimes recommend to individuals by Erwin Lutzer is Failure, the Backdoor to Success. But even in one of your chapters, you talk about something we have talked on this program about before, the 10,000 hours. Malcolm Gladwell gets mentioned quite a bit around here because we certainly appreciate some of the work that he's done. But it's just a reminder that if you really want to be successful, you really have to hone your craft. And you gave me another great example of that, and that is the Beatles. I have really never paid attention to that one before, but any person that's ever been maybe in a symphony, any athlete, I think about just about anything I've had to do, whether it's some of my hobbies or some of my speaking, will all attest to the fact that you aren't good from the outset. You oftentimes have to work for a long time to hone your craft and become really excellent at that. So for people that maybe are in your generation saying, I'm really not good at anything, well, focus, spend some time, and eventually maybe you will be, because after those 10,000 hours, that seems to be kind of the breakthrough point at which individuals come from being an apprentice to being a professional.
That's right. By the age of 21, the average American has completed 10,000 hours of practice into computer games.
Yeah.
So when people say I'm not good at anything, well, you're good at what you put a lot of time and investment into, if you even have a small gift. Ultimately, the Beatles, they practiced 8 hours a day, 7 days a week at a club in Hamburg, Germany. They were horrible before they began doing those shows. Probably felt like 8 days a week. By the time they were done, they were amazing. And by the time the British invasion happened and they went on the Ed Sullivan show and took America by storm, people thought, oh, these mop-topped Liverpool boys from England just have the nebulous X factor. But really, they had done more live shows before the British invasion ever began than most bands do in their entire career. So they had put in the practice. It takes thousands of hours to become an overnight success. So ultimately, the same is true with, you mentioned failures earlier. Failure is part and parcel of greatness. I mean, Winston Churchill failed sixth grade. Dr. Seuss's first book was rejected by 27 different publishers. Walt Disney was told by a newspaper editor that he had no good ideas and lacked imagination, and that's why he was fired. I mean, you look at Moses in the Bible, who had temper problems, and David, who had parenting problems, and Elijah, who was moody. I always like to encourage people, the greats fail. So you got to fail forward, because failure's not fatal. Success is not final, as Churchill said. It's the courage to continue on that counts. So for anybody listening who might feel like a failure, I just want to encourage you. You're part of a very, very great squad. We might fail, but God's love never fails, and that's what counts.
One of your chapters is "Impossible is Not in My Dictionary." And, of course, over the years, we have had a chance to interview people like Zig Ziglar and others. And I think it's important to recognize that there is a tendency for our listeners in their particular professions or even in their life to give up too soon. And what you're really saying to your fellow millennials and centennials and others is, don't use the word impossible. Impossible is in the dictionary for fools rather than in what God can do with you in the midst of your circumstance.
That's right. Jesus said, with God, nothing is impossible. Napoleon Bonaparte said, impossible is a word only in the dictionary of fools. And the word impossible to me, when I hear it, the word impossible is a dare, not a declaration. So I want to be like so young in my faith that I'm too young to realize that certain things are impossible, so I'll do them anyway. Kind of like William Pitt the Younger. I mean, when he was 24 years old, he became Prime Minister of England. So I figure if he can do that in his youth, nothing's impossible for him. What's stopping me from conquering anything in my path with the power of God?
One of the things I find so interesting, and of course you have a chapter here on science, and I learned a little bit more about subatomic particles and everything else, but one of the things I found from a friend of mine who had his PhD in chemistry is most of the great advancements that actually took place in the field of chemistry, and since then I found that this is in other fields of science, oftentimes came from people outside the field. In other words, if you're in chemistry, you're in physics, you're in medicine, whatever it is, and somebody says, well, we can't do that, that's impossible. It's somebody out there not knowing it's impossible and then goes ahead and does it. You know, I've seen this in mathematics. They say this particular mathematical corollary can never be solved. And then somebody that doesn't know that it can't be solved goes and solves it. So that's something to think about just from a Christian point of view, that sometimes when we create barriers or obstacles, we don't allow God to work in our lives. And so if that's true in the area of science or medicine or even in mathematics, how much more true is that in the Christian life?
That's exactly right. I mean, when you're talking about scientific anomalies, people who were not in the field or who disrupted the established order, I look at somebody like, Werner Heisenberg and Max Planck and Niels Bohr, these quantum physicists who pulled the rug out from Newtonian physics. Newton basically said that everything runs according to law and order, but then these quantum physicists are finding actually subatomic particles can leap from point A to point B without traveling the distance in between. So electrons can actually teleport. Like, there's subatomic particles that can exist in two places at the same time, can be everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, and pop into existence out of nowhere. I mean, the more you study science, I love what Werner Heisenberg said. He discovered the uncertainty principle that you can't predict both the position and momentum of a quantum particle simultaneously. He said the first step of the natural sciences will make an atheist out of you, but God is waiting for you at the bottom of the glass.
Yes, I love that line.
The more you plumb the deeps of science, the more you find that we've passed through the wardrobe. We're in Narnia. This thing's filled with wonder. So we might as well remove impossible from our dictionary altogether.
I love that quote that you had in here about you find God at the bottom of the glass. So that's really good. We only have a few minutes left, so let's, if we can, talk about your website for just a minute, bencourson.com. And there you have your TV show and your radio program. You have your podcast, all sorts of resources. Of course, people can get your book there as well. But talk about some of the resources that are available, because, first of all, for any of our listeners, that would be valuable. But, Ben, we also have a fair number of people that listen to this that are maybe professors or pastors or teachers of a Bible fellowship small group, and you've got some great resources that they could use in their communication, either in the classroom or in the church or in their small group. Talk about that.
Yeah, so we have a television program that airs on 13 networks in 180 countries, and so we have a new episode every week. But also for the younger generation, we post it every week on YouTube. So on our Hope Generation YouTube channel, we have new TV shows that come up every week, and we actually upload videos about every other day on average. And then, yeah, we have a daily podcast called Hope Generation, and on our website we have like our little short films and mini movies. So we try to just use every platform necessary to get out the message of hope. Because I look at Paul, like he used the Roman roads, the Persian mailing system, the dictation of letters. I mean, he was employing and deploying the most cutting-edge technology of his day. So at Hope Generation, that's what we like to do as well.
And let me just mention that you also have a section on travel, because we broadcast in, I think the latest count is 42 different states. So it's quite possible that some of our listeners here might be able to hear you. Of course, you have the information about Point of View on there, but then you're in all sorts of different venues where we broadcast. So if somebody wants to come out and hear you, to meet you or get a copy of your book signed or something like that, that's another way in which people can have a chance to benefit from some of the material that's on your website.
Yeah, I've been kind of living on the road, so I'll probably come to a city near you sometime soon. So on our travel calendar, you can find all of that. And also on Instagram, Facebook, we post that stuff as well.
So again, we have links to the TV show. We have links to the radio show, the podcast. Of course, go to the YouTube channel. There's an app as well if you wanted to follow Ben there. And, of course, all of that is at bencourson.com. And, Ben, I just am very thrilled that your book is out. And I appreciate is with a very busy life that you had, you've been able to give us a half an hour here today here on Point of View. So thank you for joining us today.
You're very gifted. Thank you for your time. I appreciate what you do, and I can't wait till next time, my friend.
Well, we'll do it again. I would love to maybe even get you on the Millennial Roundtable, so we'll see if we can hand this to Dr. Nick Pitts and have you join the roundtable of other millennials talking about this issue of hopelessness and the need for us to have a biblical view of hope. So let's take a break. Ken Harrison's going to be with us. He is the author of the book Rise of the Servant Kings. He's the chairman of the board of Promise Keepers. So all of you Promise Keepers out there, I think you'll really benefit from this. Forward by Stu Weber, who's also been on the program with us as well. And I think this would be just a great opportunity to talk about what it means to be a man of God. And it would be one that I thought about we could do closer to Father's Day, but, that's okay. We'll do it close to Mother's Day and certainly talk about the importance of looking at manhood from a biblical point of view. So, first of all, if you'd like to know more about Ben Courson, it's all on our website, pointofview.net. When we come back, we'll spend a little bit of time talking with Ken Harrison about the rise of servant kings, what the Bible says about being a man. All that coming up right after this.
It's amazing but true. When it comes to one of America's biggest household expenditures, healthcare, a lot of people think they've got no choice. People are used to thinking we have to do it this way, but they don't. Yes, you have the freedom to choose an alternative with your healthcare. It's MediShare, and it costs way less than the alternatives. The typical family saves $500 a month, not a year, a month. And if you're single, this can save you a lot too. And let's face it, a big reason MediShare is 400,000 people strong, it just works. They've shared over $3 billion in medical bills, so they can help share your needs too. Joining MediShare for so many people is one of those things that makes you say, why didn't I do this before? So yes, the time has come for something better. Look into joining MediShare and see why so many people are opting out of the old way and into the new. Why not look into this? Just call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
We now return to the conversation that we have so often about how to really be a man of God. It's a conversation we have on Point of View with some regularity, and so a while back when I received kind of an advance copy of a book that was going to come out this month, The Rise of Servant Kings, What the Bible Says About Being a Man, I thought this would be just a great interview, especially since it is written by a man who is now the chairman of the board of Promise Keepers, also serves, by the way, as a CEO of Waterstone Foundation, a Christian donor-advised fund that provides so much to build up God's kingdom, and an individual that, if you're not familiar with him, in the past served as a police officer in Los Angeles and has been through quite a bit, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute. This book is now coming out. It is published by our good friends at Multnomah, and the foreword by also good friend Stu Weber, that really will help you understand a little bit more about what it means to be a godly man. And so whether you're a man listening to this or a woman looking for any kind of encouragement you can give to a man in your life, I hope that you'll pay attention. But first of all, Ken, let me welcome you to Point of View. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thanks, Kerby.
Let's, if we can, talk about The Rise of Servant Kings. First time I saw that, I said, okay, here's somebody who's been reading Jody Dillow, because that was the author of his book. And, of course, I've known Jody for decades, so that goes all the way back there. By the way, I was struck by the fact that Linda Dillow actually said some nice things about this, as well as, of course, Mark Batterson and John Stone Street and all sorts of people that have been on the program with us, Oz Guinness, but also Bill McCartney, because he was the founder of Promise Keepers and has passed the baton on to you. Can you tell us a little bit more about that before we get into the book?
Sure, yeah. Promise Keepers has come back in a huge way, and actually we're announcing tomorrow that we're going to be in a major NFL stadium on July 31st and August 1st of 2020. So Promise Keepers is coming back to its glory from the 90s NFL stadium events, and that's why Coach McCartney came back and asked me to bring back Promise Keepers.
Well, again, I have been aware of some of the things happening behind the scenes, and back in its heyday, I was going to many of those. We were doing radio broadcasts sometimes from some of those stadiums, and so it's been exciting to see what has happened, and that really provides a context for this, because this is the idea that we get so many false signals, if you will, from a culture about what it means to be a man. And really, one of the things you are calling us back to is get back into God's Word and understand what biblical manhood is all about, right?
That's absolutely right. I mean, we are listening to so many lies today, and Christians are actually just confused. And what led me to read the book, or to write the book, actually, was when I came back to Promise Keepers and we turned on the barrage of emails coming in and letters, hundreds every week, of guys with the most basic questions, and confusion and disunity just reigning because they're listening to what the world says instead of what God's Word says. And unfortunately, too many men today don't even know the basics of what the Bible says.
And I think that's part of the issue. One of the themes that ran through Promise Keepers, and of course one of the chapters in your book, is this whole idea of holiness. That is not something that you hear talked about in secular society. Sometimes you don't hear it all that often about what is happening in church. And so that's one of the key issues there, because of this idea of holiness and the whole issue of really doing, if you will, a significant emphasis on what you put in your eye gate and your ear gate, and how to really begin to be a holy man of God in a society that is drawing you out in almost every direction to unrighteousness and a lack of holiness. True?
Well, I mean, to be candid, I mean, we're talking a lot about what's happening to men nowadays, and pornography is eviscerating this country, the church. And I have found, you know, as a police officer in a very high crime area, and then running international businesses, that when you see guys in sexual perversion or promiscuity, it almost always leads to either effeminism or deep anger. And that's exactly what we see playing out. We see women saying, we see sexual abuse, sexual harassment. Men are caught up in this whole sexual thing. And then we go back to the church, and we hear too many churches nowadays saying, well, Jesus loves you no matter what. Mm-hmm. So we know you're going to be a bad boy. So try not to be bad, but you're going to be bad anyway. And Jesus still loves you. And the Jesus that I read about in Scripture says, if your eye causes you to stumble, tear it out. That's pretty harsh. And he says, I came to turn fathers against sons and mothers against daughters. Pick up your cross daily and follow me. And so really what we're talking about is making men into disciples. No more chocolate soldiers who shrink as soon as the heat gets turned on. Because we have women and children here who are suffering deeply because men are checking out of society. They're loaded down with their sins, and they don't understand that Jesus says, I love you, and I'll forgive you no matter what, but you've got to repent and turn to me. This idea that we can continue to live a sinful lifestyle, selfish lifestyle, all about ourselves, and that Jesus is just fine with all that. That is not taught in Scripture.
Yes. Again, if you want some more information, we, of course, have the book out. You'll probably be able to find it in your local bookstore, but we also have a link of riseoftheservantkings.com. And I thought for just a minute, Ken, let's, if we can, maybe talk about your experience, because I learned a lot more about being a police officer in Los Angeles. I mean, you talk about holding a young person in your arms, watching her die. You talk about Rodney King. I mean, you've been through quite a bit, even before you found yourself in the position that you were right now, and you draw upon those experiences from having served as a police officer in Los Angeles, and really one of the more difficult areas of Los Angeles, I might even mention, Watch Compton. And that is something that kind of fuels you to also speak to men about this important issue of being a godly person in a secular society.
Well, I've seen the consequences of sin in a very real way all the time, every day, and you saw in the book, I mean, we talk about how as the sun would come up in the morning, a lot of times we would see women out there scrubbing the blood off their sidewalks from all the shootings and the murders and whatnot. And so this complacent idea we have about sin, I've seen it up close and personal. And then, when I got into business, it was really quite the education. I was a bit naive because I thought all bad guys were gang colors and carried 9mm. But I learned that a lot of really bad guys wear suits and ties, too. And so one of the things I talk about in the book is that humility is the mark of a person who's in love with Jesus Christ. And the way that humility is expressed in an outward fashion in a man is in courage and humility. Because we're always, there's a lot of women out there listening to this going, well, how do I know a godly man if I'm looking for someone to invest with in a business or someone to marry or a pastor who I want to follow? How do I know? And I always say you begin and end with humility. And some Christians are really good at faking it, but you can't fake courage and humility. Courage and generosity. Courage because when you don't see yourself as the most important person in the room, you're going to stand up for what's right. You're going to care for the poor and the oppressed. You're going to vocally stand up against abortion. You're going to witness to strangers in the marketplace, even though you might get rejected or insulted. Generosity is a generosity of spirit. It's not just giving well, which it is. It's not just tipping well in a restaurant, which it is. But it's noticing that, hey, the gal who just made my coffee looks like there's something wrong with her, and walking up and saying, is there something wrong? What can I pray for you for today?
Good.
Taking the time to pour into other people. And then lastly, when we see people in need, how many of us in church, someone says, oh, I've got this going on, or I lost my job, or my child said this or that, and we say, oh, I'll pray for you. But generosity means that we actually will pray for them. We mean it. We take a note down, and we pour ourselves out for our brothers and sisters in Christ the same as we would if it was our own kids. That's generosity that comes from a humble heart. That's how you know if someone is a godly man.
I might just say that I thought the middle of your book was just full of great material, because chapter 8 is humility, which you just mentioned, 9 is courage, and 10 is generosity. And even though you just mentioned humility in passing, I thought that was very important, because an individual that no longer compares himself with others, is not seeking recognition, those kinds of things are really important in terms of humility. But you also talked about this idea of courage and generosity. And we certainly find ourselves saying, where are the men standing up? A lot of the battles that we talk about here on Point of View, a lot of these political battles are being led by women. The concerned mother, the concerned housewife, actually contacting members of Congress or contacting their state legislature or running for the school board. And I'm going, where are the guys? The men should be standing up and fighting these battles. We don't send women into war to fight for us, although we actually do now. But nevertheless, I think you've got some really good points about that in terms of courage and generosity. And when we come back, I want to also maybe get to another one, and that is what true masculinity is, because, again, we don't get the right messages. We, first of all, have kind of this Lone Ranger mindset. And even the Lone Ranger had Tonto. So, I mean, again, this idea that we need to have one another, encourage one another, keep accountable to one another, certainly important. But also what the image of masculinity is, how do we look at that from a biblical point of view? So 17 chapters, I will certainly only touch on briefly a few of those, but I wanted you to know about this new book that is out now. And again, the Rise of the ServantKings.com is on our website. We also have links as well to Ken Harrison's Facebook and Twitter posts. So all of that available at our website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break. We'll continue right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
New book just out, and again, Rise of the Servant Kings, what the Bible says about being a man. Ken Harrison with us, a foreword by Stu Weber, and let me just, before we run out of time, talk about a couple of other chapters, one on masculinity, one on marriage. Those were some very important principles there as well. And part of it is, Ken, we unfortunately in this world today are getting such mixed and confused messages, as you mentioned just a minute ago, on what it means to be a man. No wonder we have such a difficulty with this whole idea of what is true biblical masculinity.
That's right. And it's because we keep listening to the message of the world. I'm always shocked by Christians who tell me the TV shows they watch, the movies they go to see. And I think, man, if you're filling your head with that stuff, how are you really getting the balance of what Jesus Christ has to say? Because only the Bible has a true message about what it means to be a man. we point out in the book is in masculinity, the most foundational aspect of true masculinity is accountability.
Mm-hmm.
The man understands that God has called him to be in leadership, and that means being accountable for all the things at which he is responsible for. And so, one of the things that's really important to look at in the book is that a man is accountable for what goes on in his family. If his kids aren't right, if his marriage isn't right, he's accountable for that. Now, that does not mean that he's at fault if things are wrong, because sometimes things are out of our control. Sometimes people in our family listen to the lies of Satan. Things can happen that we just didn't have control of. I just was talking to a guy a couple of weeks ago whose daughter has Lyme disease in a very bad way, and he was beating himself up over, gosh, if you catch Lyme disease in the first week or two, you can change it. And he's, I didn't know any better. She had it for months before we found it. Now her life is so much harder, and that's not something that's his fault. And I talk in the book about a friend of mine who did his marriage in a godly way, in every way possible, but his wife still turned around and left him because she was really rejecting Jesus and not him. It's not his fault. We don't blame people. But he's accountable for everything that goes on in his life. For if his marriage is bad, saying, why is the marriage bad? What will I do to change it? Not how can I blame my wife for what's wrong with our marriage? And so then flipping back over to the marriage chapter, a lot of the female editors that worked on this book said, geez, I have a great marriage, one of them said to me, but my husband still needs to read this chapter on marriage because it talked a lot in there about empathy. Right?
Yes.
Men's bodies don't ever change. We have the same consistent body all the time, and so we have a certain way of seeing the world. Well, we have to remember that a woman's body changes all the time. Puberty can be very traumatic for a girl, and then a monthly change, and then pregnancy can be very altering, and then menopause. And a man, his body's just the same old body. Well, that changes how you perceive the world. And we could go a long way down to why this gender fluidity is such nonsense. Because obviously, if you have a certain way your body works, you're going to have a certain way of seeing the world. But then also talking about just sex for in married couples. For a woman in the natural state, every sexual encounter could be a life-altering event. That is a pregnancy, a child. We talk about the great gift of life. For a man, it's just one act, and there is no sexual consequence. And so therefore, we're going to perceive that very differently in our natural sense. And so we as men need to be very sensitive to our wives about that sort of thing.
Yes. And for the listeners out there, that especially in teaching role, pastor, Sunday school leader, Bible fellowship leader, this whole section on masculinity would just be a great message during Father's Day, because you talk about, if you will, 4 stages of the decline of masculinity. One is passivity, that's cowards and unbelievers. Number 2 is the macho man, the vile and the murderers. Number 3, sexual perversion and greed, the sexual immoral, sorcerers, idolaters. And number 4, complacency, liars. And so if nothing else, just kind of taking on those issues would certainly be appropriate as you look at Revelation 21, verse 8. So again, just some great material that I think people would find very helpful in terms of the teaching that takes place. But let's, if we can, just before we let you go, talk about some of the other chapters. You talk about the importance of prayer and wait. Explain that for just a minute, because that's certainly important for us as well. And that's something that oftentimes men or even speakers at men's conferences don't spend as much time talking about.
And I'll tell you, Kerby, one of the biggest things we miss, if you just go through the Psalms, Psalm 25, several of Psalms, David talks over and over again about waiting on the Lord. In fact, Andrew Murray, if you want a really, really great book, get Waiting on God by Andrew Murray, that he wrote 150 years ago. We as Christians these days, as soon as things get a little bit difficult, we say, well, I guess God wasn't in it, and we stop. Or we have some great ambition of ours, and we run down the road really fast without waiting on the Lord. And we need to understand that God is in the quiet places. I love that verse. Yes. I quote in the book by, in Ezekiel, where he talks about when God comes by and there was an earthquake, and he wasn't in the earthquake, and there was no, but then there was a still quiet, and God was in the quiet. And God meets us. Judge Vance Day, who's our COO for Promise Keepers, always says, God never takes an opportunity to be early, but he's never late. And we must remember he works in his time when he's ready, not our time. And so one of the things I talk about in the book is we know when it's Satan who's driving us because we feel anxious, I got to do this now, and stressed out. God is never in that. The Holy Spirit is always in peace, I've got this, son. Just wait on me. So we use our efforts to the best of our skill and training when he leads us to go, not in charging forward with our own self-will.
You know, and again, I have had a chance over the years to interview some people. I remember one individual one time said something I never really thought about, and he said, there's nowhere in the New Testament where it tells us that Jesus ran. I thought, oh, that's a good point. Matter of fact, if anything, you could say just the opposite. Lazarus is dying, and Jesus is taking his time getting there. So, I mean, if indeed even the creator of the universe in human form was not racing anywhere, and yet it seems to us, Ken, that all of us are racing around and always in a panic and always stressed out. Maybe that chapter on weight would be an appropriate one. But just before we let you go, I wanted to talk about the fact that we do have a link to the website. It's riseoftheservantkings.com. Good news is you don't even have to remember all that. Simply find our link. People can download a sample chapter before they get a copy of the book. They can find all sorts of other resources. And I was looking at some of the resources that you have there, which would be really helpful in terms of the media, blog, some of the events and those kinds of things. So if somebody wanted to use this to teach in a Sunday school class or a small group, you've got a material other than this book available, don't you?
We do, and the publisher was so gracious. They actually hired a writer to write a free Bible study that goes with this book that you can download for free. I was really pleased when I saw it. And the book actually comes out tomorrow, so if a listener is going, well, let me stop at Barnes & Noble, and, well, it won't be there until tomorrow. But you can pre-order it right now on Amazon. And you can go on to riseoftheservantkings.com or go through your link and download the free Bible study that goes with it.
And so, again, you got all that material. Again, I've had the uncorrected proof for quite some time and just noticed it was coming out tomorrow, but I thought it would be good to alert people today. And again, this would be just something that would be an excellent opportunity to teach in your small group because they have that Bible study. It would be excellent there as well. And so, again, our good friends at Multnomah have made that available. And again, forward by Stu Weber. So, Ken Harrison, thank you for that. And thank you for announcing the fact that we're going to hear a little bit more about Promise Keepers. So we'll pay attention to that and announce it as soon as it's made public. So thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Oh, thank you.
We're going to take a break. And when we come back tomorrow, it will be what? Well, it'll be the Millennial Roundtable. We've moved it from Wednesday to Tuesday now. And Nick Pitts will have a roundtable of individuals that will join us. And then let me just mention, of course, I mentioned Skip Heisig will be with us on Thursday along with J. Warner Wallace. Taya Kyle will be with us on Wednesday. She is the widow of Chris Kyle. Yeah, of course, you may have seen the movie American Sniper. And Sean McDowell will be with us as well. So it's just going to be quite a week. And so I wish we had more hours we could fit in, but that's what we've got so far. One last time, I want to welcome WFAL. I want to thank Andrew for his help behind the scenes. And Steve, tomorrow is our Millennial Roundtable right here on Point of View.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our